They say silence has its own voice, and sometimes it screams. That night, in a mansion where every sound was usually predictable, a single noise broke the order. It came from upstairs. Mr. Calderon, a man whose wealth had bought him everything but peace, froze halfway up the marble staircase. The sound was soft at first, a creak, then a whisper, almost human. His chest tightened. No one was supposed to be there. The house should have been empty. Yet as he climbed the steps, each one echoing in the stillness, the noise grew clearer. A voice trembling, pleading. He pushed the door open slowly, and what he saw made time stop. It wasn't a thief. It wasn't a ghost from his past. It was his maid, on her knees beside his bed, tears streaming down her face, holding something that would shatter everything he thought he knew about his life. For a long second, he couldn't move. The room felt colder, as if the air itself had withdrawn. The woman lifted her eyes, and in them he saw something he hadn't seen in years, fear mixed with sorrow, like a confession without words. "Mr. Calderon," she whispered, her voice breaking, but he didn't answer. His mind was a storm of questions. Why was she here? What was she hiding? And why did he feel deep inside that this moment was not about trespassing, but about truth? The object in her hands trembled, small, wrapped in an old cloth, something fragile. His heart pounded harder. Every instinct told him to demand answers, to shout, to reclaim control. Yet something held him still. It wasn't power this time. It was the quiet recognition of a man who sensed that what he was about to learn would change the story of his life forever. He took a cautious step forward, his polished shoes clicking softly against the floor. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice calm but edged with disbelief. The maid clutched the bundle tighter, pressing it to her chest as if it were something sacred. "Please," she said, tears still falling, "don't take it from me yet." Her words sliced through the air like glass. He had never heard her speak that way, not with defiance, but with a kind of desperate dignity. For years, she had been invisible to him, a presence that existed in the periphery of his perfect life. Yet now, in that dim light, she was the only thing that felt real. The man's pulse raced. His empire, his rules, his certainty, all began to crumble under the weight of a single moment. He reached out his hand, not in anger this time, but in confusion, in fear of what that small bundle might reveal. She hesitated for a moment, her trembling hands betraying the weight of what she carried. Then slowly she loosened the cloth. The man leaned closer, his breath shallow, as the dim light of the bedside lamp revealed a glimpse of what was hidden. A photograph, old, faded, the edges worn by time, and beside it a small silver pendant, engraved with initials he recognized instantly. C.R., his own. The air in the room grew thick, almost unbreathable. He stepped back, as if the truth itself had struck him. "Where did you get this?" he demanded, but his voice cracked before the words were fully formed. The maid didn't answer. Instead, she looked at him with a sadness so deep it silenced everything else. "I didn't steal it," she whispered. "I kept it because someone asked me to." At that moment, the world he had built, the walls, the silence, the wealth, began to fracture like glass beneath the weight of something far older than guilt, memory. He stared at the pendant, the way one stares at a ghost that suddenly remembers your name. The initials glimmered faintly under the light, and with them came a flood of memories he thought he had buried long ago. A voice, a laugh, the smell of rain on a forgotten afternoon. He swallowed hard. "Someone asked you to?" he repeated, almost to himself. The maid nodded, her gaze fixed on the floor. "Years ago," she said softly, "before you left, before you became who you are now." Her words pierced through him like truth breaking through stone. Suddenly, the walls of the mansion felt smaller, the air heavier. He realized he was no longer the man who owned this house. He was the man who had once made a promise, one he had never kept. And standing before him was the only person who still remembered it. He took another step toward her, his eyes fixed on the pendant as if it could speak. "Who asked you to keep it?" His voice was lower now, stripped of command, trembling with something almost human. The maid hesitated, her lips parting to answer, then closing again as tears welled up. "Someone who loved you," she finally said. The words hung in the air like the echo of a confession. The man's chest tightened. He searched her face for lies, but found only pain, the kind that doesn't need to be explained. A storm of recognition brewed inside him, flashes of faces, moments, promises, whispered in rooms that no longer existed. And beneath it all, a single thought rose like a tide. There was something she knew that he had forgotten. The silence between them grew dense, alive, carrying the weight of years neither dared to name. The room felt smaller now, as if the walls themselves were listening. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. There was only the echo of her last words. "Someone who loved you." It struck him harder than he expected, not because he didn't know love, but because he hadn't felt it in decades. "Who?" he whispered. "Who loved me?" The maid's eyes lifted, glistening with tears that caught the dim light like shards of truth. "She told me you would forget," she said, her voice breaking. "But she made me promise that one day when the house was quiet again, I would remind you." His pulse quickened. A name tried to surface in his mind, fragile, distant, covered by years of silence. "Remind me of what?" he asked, though part of him already knew, the way the heart sometimes remembers before the mind does. The maid's hands shook as she placed the pendant in his palm. "Remind you of her," she whispered. For a moment everything stopped. The ticking clock, the distant hum of the city outside, even the air itself. "Her?" The word echoed through his mind like a forgotten melody. He looked down at the pendant again, at the initials engraved beneath the dust of years, and then it hit him, a name whispered through memory. Clara. The sound of it made his throat tighten. He hadn't spoken it in more than 20 years. Clara, the woman who had once been his compass, his only measure of warmth in a life built on ambition and walls of stone. She had vanished when he chose business over love, leaving behind a silence he had filled with wealth. And now, through the trembling hands of a maid, her presence returned like a ghost demanding to be remembered. The maid nodded softly, as if reading his thoughts. "She never stopped waiting," she said. "Even when you did." He felt his knees weaken as though the memory itself had weight. "You knew her," he said quietly. The maid nodded, her hands trembling as she wiped the tears from her face. "I didn't just know her," she replied. "She was like family to me. I worked for her before you ever knew her name." The confession hit him like cold wind. He remembered the small apartment, the evenings filled with laughter, the scent of coffee and rain, details so vivid they hurt. "She made me promise," the maid continued, her voice steadying. "If something ever happened to her, I was to keep this safe until I could give it back to you. She said you would need it more than anyone." His throat tightened. The pendant in his hand suddenly felt heavier, alive with everything he had tried to forget: love, loss, the version of himself that once believed in both. And in that moment he realized the noise he had heard upstairs was not an accident. It was the past, finally coming home. The maid took a deep breath, as if preparing to open a wound that had never truly healed. "She was sick," she said finally, "and she didn't want you to see her that way." The words fell slowly, each one heavier than the last. "She wrote to you many times, but the letters were never sent. She asked me to keep them, hoping one day you'd come back." The man's vision blurred. His chest tightened with something raw, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. "Why didn't you tell me?" he whispered, his voice breaking. The maid looked at him, not as a servant, but as someone who had carried a secret too long. "Because she made me promise not to," she said. "She wanted you to remember her as she was, not as she became." The room felt colder now, filled with the echo of everything unsaid. He realized then that all his success, his empire, his solitude had been built over a silence he never dared to question. The maid reached into her coat pocket, her movement slow, deliberate, as if every gesture carried the weight of years. From within, she pulled a small stack of envelopes, yellowed and frayed at the edges. The sight of them made his breath hitch. His name was written on each one, in the same delicate handwriting he had once traced with his fingertips under candlelight. "She wanted you to have them," the maid whispered, placing the letters in his trembling hands. He stared at them, unable to open even the first. The ink had faded, but her presence had not. It was as if she were standing beside him again, whispering through paper across time. When he finally broke the seal, the scent of old perfume escaped, faint but unmistakable. And then her words came alive. "If you are reading this, it means you have found what I left behind, not my possessions, but the truth of who we were." His throat closed. For the first time in years, he felt human again. Her words unfolded slowly, like the pages of a forgotten life. "You once told me love was a distraction," the letter read, "but I believed it was the only thing that ever made you real." His eyes moved across the faded lines, each sentence pulling him deeper into memories he had tried to erase. "I watched you chase the world," Clara wrote, "but I knew the day would come when the world would no longer chase you. When that day arrives, I hope you remember the sound of our laughter, because that was the truest thing we ever built." His vision blurred as he read on. Every word felt like a mirror held to his soul, not accusing, but remembering. He could almost hear her voice again, gentle, steady, the kind that doesn't demand forgiveness, but offers understanding instead. And in that moment, surrounded by silence and ghosts, he realized Clara had never really left. She had been waiting. In the spaces between his regrets, his fingers trembled as he reached the last envelope. It was thinner than the others, sealed with wax that had long since cracked. The maid stood silently, her presence like a shadow at the edge of memory. He opened it carefully. Inside, a single sheet, Clara's handwriting softer now, almost fragile. "By the time you read this," it began, "I will be gone. But what I leave behind is not sorrow. It is a piece of you that never stopped existing." His breath caught. "You once said you didn't believe in second chances," the letter continued, "but there is one upstairs who does. I named him after you." The words blurred as his tears fell, splashing onto the paper. He looked up slowly, toward the maid, confusion and dawning realization colliding inside him. Her eyes met his, steady, sorrowful, yet full of something unmistakable. "She made me promise," the maid whispered, "to protect him. Until you were ready to know." He rose from the bed slowly, the letter still trembling in his hand. Every step toward the staircase felt heavier than the last, as if the house itself were holding its breath. The maid followed him in silence, her eyes glistening with the weight of years. When they reached the top of the stairs, a faint sound broke the stillness, the soft, uneven breathing of a child asleep. He hesitated at the doorway, afraid to move, afraid to believe. Inside the dimly lit room, a small boy lay curled beneath a blanket, his hair the same dark shade Calderon once saw in the mirror as a young man. On the nightstand sat another pendant, identical to the one in his hand. The man's heart clenched. His knees gave way, and for the first time in decades he wept without restraint. The maid stepped beside him, whispering through her tears, Clara wanted him to know love before he knew your name. But now, it's time. The boy stirred, opened his eyes, and smiled. Time seemed to pause, as if the world itself bowed to the moment. The man knelt beside the bed, his hand trembling as it hovered near the boy's face. There was no need for words. The truth was written in their eyes. All the walls he had built, all the noise he had chased, none of it mattered now. What remained was simple, fragile, and real. He brushed the boy's hair gently, feeling a warmth he hadn't known in years. The maid stood in the doorway, watching in silence, the promise she had carried for so long, finally fulfilled. Calderon looked up at her, his voice barely a whisper. "Thank you," he said. She nodded, tears glistening. In that quiet room, surrounded by the ghosts of the past, something shifted, not the sound of wealth or loss, but of forgiveness. The mansion, once hollow, now breathed again. And for the first time in his life, the rich man understood what it meant to be home. They say every house keeps its own secrets, echoes that wait patiently for someone brave enough to listen. In that mansion, silence had once been a weapon, a reminder of everything lost. But that night it became something else, a witness to forgiveness. The rich man who once measured life in numbers now measured it in heartbeats, in the quiet breathing of a child, in the soft footsteps of a woman who had kept her promise. He no longer feared the sound upstairs. It was no longer the noise of ghosts, but the rhythm of life returning. And though time could not bring Clara back, her love had found its way home, through the voice of a child, through the courage of a promise kept, through the sound of a man finally learning to listen.